Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Filmmaking Behind, a series where we break down cutscenes from our favourite video games to see how they work and why. Last week you were given the choice between Majora's Mask and Sonic Adventure 2, and the results were crystal clear. So sorry Sonic, but it looks like you're going to go to the archives for now. Maybe you'll pop up later. Anyway, today we're going to look at 8 selected scenes spread across the whole story of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. If you feel the video ends up too long, let me know. I'm experimenting with video length this week. Also, my voice is going to sound different for the next few weeks because I'm in between houses and recording setups are a bit of a mess. Right, with that out of the way, let's watch. So Majora's Mask starts with 30 seconds of text expedition. There's not too much in the way of creativity going on here, obviously, but this is very common in Zelda games, specifically as it keeps up the theme of an ancient legend being told. We then fade to white, which takes us to the first proper scene of the game. The camera starts up high and slowly moves down across the trees in this misty forest. This makes sense with the legend theming, as it's like we're coming into the story. We also have Link journeying into the scene, which is common in hero stories as it often has the hero enter the scene at the start of the story and then leave the same location at the very end, like a guardian angel just passing by. Anyway, interestingly, Link is moving from the right hand side of the screen to the left, which goes against the classic trope of heroes moving left to right. But oh well. Once moved in a bit, the camera moves slowly to mimic the slow pace of Link and Epona. Wouldn't make sense for it to steam along with them moving so slowly. The next shot looking down on Link acts to not only reveal the two fairies watching him, but also to actually look down on him in an almost intimidating manner. Makes sense considering their intentions. The next panning shot keeps the same camera techniques, but in the end it gives off this lost feeling. Much like the start of Luigi's Mansion, except it's much more of a hopeless and lost feeling, as the movements are so slow that they come to a halt. It's clear Link's been travelling in these woods for a while to no avail. We've also got more frame within a frame imagery to make the trees seem enveloping, especially because we don't see Link pass through this tree here. Next we're up close to them and looking up. This is mostly to emphasise their next movement, because I'm not sure if the angle is too important here. If the camera was from a high angle, then the two would seem less powerful and keep up the idea that they're being watched, but this might have been taken out for this moment because the fairies have flown away and so no one is watching them right now. Or they just really wanted them to fill the frame completely. The point of view shot from Link's perspective looking up at the trees surrounding him show off how lost he is. The music is also mystical to add to this. Here come the fairies again, keeping the same angle, and for once Link's actually on the left side of the frame. Only for just a moment though. The fairies bash Epona, leading her and Link to lean off of the frame, crushing their significance. There's also a brief cut to a shot of Link falling off Epona from a pulled back position. This is simply a very swift shot to establish what's going on. If the camera stayed close to the characters, then the audience may not fully understand what is going on. This shot tells us efficiently that Link is falling off Epona. The quick cut also creates a disorientating effect, which again goes with the action of Link being pushed and falling off his horse. When Link falls, the camera stays high to look down on him and also moves on with an anchor point to create that sense of turning your head to witness the events. It may not have a symbolic purpose, but it does create that feeling, I feel. On the pan away from the scene, we also get to see the classic frame composition manipulation with Link on the bottom half of the frame and the fairies on the top. And though this is obvious, when Skull Kid appears in the next shot, the Majora's Mask is visible first, showing off that this is the most important feature of the character. I originally thought this was a draw distance or rendering error from the Nintendo 64, but the 3DS HD remake proved me wrong. The music here also has an iconic instrumental motif for Skull Kid in the form of some kind of drum, and it's intimidating, fitting for the character. Then we have the fairies collaborating into the shot to tell us that they're working together. The mask obviously doesn't blink and it's wide-eyed, which is scary, and finally we have that creepy laugh to associate with Skull Kid. All to make this supervillain. Once the dialogue starts, Skull Kid is facing to the left, classic villain, and is angled so that we can't see the face that lies behind the mask, keeping up with a minute sense of mystery for the player as to what the real face looks like. Then he starts moving right again. 180-degree rule, what's that? We then get this odd wide shot of Skull Kid cautiously moving to Link. Doesn't really serve much of a purpose other than to highlight all of Skull Kid's movements in one shot. Even then, the shot isn't really needed. The scene wouldn't change at all even if we jumped to the next shot of Skull Kid investigating Link, but hey, I'm not the director. Once again, Link is to the left of Skull Kid. For the next chunk of dialogue, the camera is pretty basic, remaining mostly static and keeping the talking characters centered to the frame. Once Link awakens, we jump 180 degrees to place Skull Kid in the background as a way to create dramatic irony, whereby the audience knows something the character doesn't. In this case, Skull Kid doesn't know that Link is awake. We then have a reverse shot of this composition with Link now in the background, though this time facing towards the camera as well as he is aware of Skull Kid's antics. Link's on the left, Link's on the right. And now the two are on an equal level, an even fight for once. Until Skull Kid nabs Epona, and now the camera is at a slightly low angle looking up at Skull Kid's heightened position. Here's some dramatic shots of Epona's gallop. Also, yes, we are breaking the 180-degree rule more and more, though this could work in keeping the confusion aspect of breaking this rule. Next, here's an establishing shot of the next area, followed by a dramatic first-person view of Epona's path, and finally Link's crash. With Epona and Skull Kid fleeing through the left side of the frame and Link being thrown off to the right side. They're twisting their positions again. Skull Kid escapes from the camera from the right side of the frame and Link is left down on the left side of the frame. And finally, here's another establishing shot of the area to show that the villain has gotten away and to orientate the audience of the area as they're just about to jump into gameplay and have to navigate this small space. Right, that's the conventional scene of this game out of the way. Let's get into the wacky. Link runs into a giant tree trunk. We start with a quick high angle shot of Link stopping at the edge of the cliff. Looking down again makes him lack power compared to the spectating audience. Then we jump to a harsher high angle to take away even more power from Link, especially since he's much smaller on the frame now, and the endless pit is not only being shown off, but also takes over the majority of the frame. Next, the camera falls down into the pit with Link, who falls faster to emphasize the action. Meanwhile, the darkness of the pit fades the scene into blackness. Perfect for a series of cartoon faces to bubble up from the darkness as we look down, foreshadowing the different masks and objects that Link will be needing on his journey. And then we fall directly onto the scene, establishing the scene slightly. After Link gets his bearings, the lighting takes on a theatre kind of role, confusing and unfitting for the scene but lighting up suddenly, as if the lights were literally just turned on. We then flip to see the other end of the room to reveal Skull Kid floating under two spotlights, keeping that theatre theme for some reason. We then get a diagonal shot of Skull Kid, creating that clearly off sense. Here's a standard composition of Link taking up half of the frame, drawing our attention strongly to Link's reactions to Skull Kid's words. Next, Skull Kid continues to float on the top half of the frame for power, whilst the eyes glow unblinkingly for more intimidation. Once the dialogue ends, the light cuts out and this magical border appears to show Skull Kid using some power. We then get a series of diagonal shots of Majora's mask getting closer and closer, creating a scary evil tone. And on Link, the camera moves slowly towards him, emphasizing something is happening internally. Meanwhile, the vision becomes blurred and the scene fades to black, giving a sense I would describe as when you're passing out and losing consciousness. Basically, we're entering some other dimension or a dream, which is exactly what happens. Over the darkness, the rattling becomes more apparent, indicating it's something important to what is going on. We then see Link once more with that blurred effect continuing, telling us we're not quite in reality. The camera then cuts to a closer shot with the rattling to emphasize his face, with single frame appearances of a Deku's face, creating a symbolic connection between the two. Also, the background is pitch black to give that sense that we're in a dream. Next, we have a high angle shot of Link surrounded by a crowd of Dekus. The blurriness emphasizes the crowd even more to further crush Link's power in this scene. The next series of shots shows the Deku fully filling the frame, clearly overpowering Link. And when Link tries to run away, the lack of background creates the idea that Link is making no progress, just like a dream, and the massive Deku appearing behind tells us that Link cannot escape from them at all. The camera then dives into Deku's mouth to transition us to a cut to black. Back to reality, we have an establishing shot of the whole scene to orientate the audience. And here's Skull Kid on the right hand side of the frame. So is Link? Bad filmmaking. Anyway, it's close up to show the audience Link's new face. We then get an interesting shot of Link looking down at his reflection to see himself, with the camera focusing on the reflection, as if Link's world has been turned upside down. And then we get a crazy fast series of shots. They're all to emphasize Link's frantic reaction and how his world is flipped. We've got head-on shot, upside down diagonal, it's actually his reflection, normal diagonal, upside down reflection, and a spinning off-center shot of both Link and his reflection. Really crazy and cool montage. Back to Skull Kid, same composition, but here's another of his laughs. And now we get to see Skull Kid floating away from the camera towards a newly opened pathway, and Link has to run towards the camera to chase him. They're opposites. And once again we have the classic composition tropes. Everything else that happens in this scene now has some pretty basic camera techniques, so let's move on to the next scene, which is quite a bit ahead. We're now going to the end of the third day, when the end of the world comes. We start with a high angle of Deku Link standing on top of the tower. He still hasn't got control as he is being looked down on once again. We then get a shot that moves to reveal what is happening atop the tower. Link is placed on the left and Skull Kid flies way up high, and the moon is even higher. Here's a closer shot so we can distinguish Skull Kid's actions, and he's placed on the right now. When Skull Kid hits tail, we're still looking up at Skull Kid and staying a little away from him, like we don't have the power to stop him. And tail gets hit down and left. Symbolically, this could mean he's losing a bit of power by going down and being pushed more towards the hero's side of the frame. It's a stretch though. Once the dialogue ends, Skull Kid activates the final moon push. The frame starts with Skull Kid in the top half of the frame before centering him, and the magical border returns as he uses his power. The echoing laugh is also haunting, to tell us that this action is bad if you couldn't already tell. Next we jump behind Skull Kid, who's now tiny on the frame, to emphasize the size and power of the moon. Why we're at this angle is possibly to put the camera directly below the moon to tell us it's about to be crushed? I'm not certain though. The 180-degree rule breaking seems to almost be an intentional joke at this point, cause then we jump to the front of the moon again. Either way, it fills the frame almost entirely, it has all the power, and is composed like a villain. Once it starts moving, we then get another high-angle shot of Link, which moves closer to him as he bounces nervously. This creates a strong feeling that dread is falling onto Link and that the responsibility falls onto his shoulders. It's a pretty powerful shot, despite it being pretty basic. And then slightly later, when Skull Kid is hit and drops the ocarina, the camera turns to focus on it since it's an important prop, and is followed by a head-on shot of Link looking directly at the camera again, showing he has acknowledged its placement, whilst the idle bouncing animation makes him seem frantic and antsy to grab it. After this, we're taken to a memory of Link talking to Princess Zelda. Opposite the nightmare from earlier, the background is now blank white, creating an angelic feeling. The monochromatic colour scheme also portrays that these events have occurred in the past. The shots themselves aren't too outstanding, so we're gonna drop them. Coming out of the memory, we're met with the same composition of Link looking directly at the camera. Though he is slightly in the lower half of the frame, he's lost a little power because he's lost in thought. And when looking from the other angle, we go back to a low angle of Skull Kid as he has dominance over Link. However, he's placed far away and thus small on the frame because he's not significant and the central attention of this moment. Tattle is. Anyway, at this point, Link uses a Song of Time to go back to day 1. The falling scene is a little interesting as it has parallels to the pit falling scene, and towards the end of the scene the whole aspect ratio seems to warp in some manner, but this makes sense as Link is warping through time. We then get a series of short shots showing the series of events occurring just before the point Link is returning to, presumably just to orientate. And though we haven't spoken about the masked salesman yet, I'll mention him briefly here as this shot is new. It's pretty basic what there is to say, but obviously the black background and the low-angled light source makes him seem like a mysterious yet slightly off character, fully fitting to his character and his scenes. And the final thing I'll mention for this sequence is the transition to Link's entry point. The camera starts from Link's face and pulls farther away, meanwhile the camera swings diagonally like it's on a pendulum, keeping with the theme of time and clocks. This is also scattered with shots of Clock Tower, orientating the players on location. It then ends with a final jolt into the upright head-on position. A cool themed transition. And that's the last bit of the scene I want to talk about. So next we're basically going to jump through the entire game's story and talk about the small yet most significant scenes in the story. Starting off, once Link learns the Song of Healing, he is unshackled from the chains of the Deku-ness. To represent this, we get a brief dreamlike scene of a blurred Deku's face being pulled away from, as well as Link waving a happy goodbye, all symbolic of Link being released from the soul of a Deku. And with that, the new Deku mask falls at his feet, a classic dropping prop shot. And then we get a head-on shot of Link in his human form. His power is returned to him and he is once again on even ground. Next, we're jumping way ahead to the end of the first dungeon, where Link journeyed to in order to communicate with one of 4 giants of the land, who are needed to save the world. We start from a white fade looking and moving up a giant tower. Doing this action emphasizes the size of the tower and thus puts Link on a huge pedestal. He has a lot of power and responsibility at this moment, even if he doesn't know where he is. The twirling camera shot shows the environment Link is in. The wide angle makes Link look puny in the frame, which is important as it highlights the vastness of this mystical land above the clouds. The camera then turns to the right and pulls up to somewhat look at the figure off in the distance, giving it power. It's also kind of hidden in the corner of the frame to give it a sense of mystery, though it still towers over puny Link. We then get a shot behind Link's head moving closer to the giant, building suspense as we slowly clear through the mist. And once we see the giant, we see it's still a little concealed, giving it a godlike mystique, while it stands on the top of the frame for power. Next shot, the giant begins singing from the right of the frame. This isn't to present it as a villain, but just to oppose it to Link as they are talking to each other, and so would be facing each other. Though, as per usual, the angle is low to keep him towering. Link is also given this low angle. This works to both give him that legend-like power, and also connect in directly with the giant, showing that they are seen as equals. Once Link repeats the song, the camera is head-on, centering Link in the frame because of the importance of the following action. Once playing, the background briefly fades to white for a moment. Perhaps this is to symbolize a goddess tone once again, as this background was last used when remembering Zelda, which was followed by the words, "The goddess of time is protecting you," so maybe the same is apparent here. We then get another swirling shot as Link plays, giving a dramatic portrayal of the song, with the low angle again empowering Link. And then we begin pulling away from the tower and towards the giant, connecting the two and telling us that the communication between Link and the giant has concluded, as the song has been passed. The giant then begins communicating from the left side of the frame, whilst Link is on the right, because who needs continuity? Anyway, we transition out of this scene with another fade to white. Next we're skipping ahead to the Healing of Darmani. It's another short dream scene. It begins with the camera moving closer to Darmani's disgruntled face as it begins to lose its stability and lean left and right before the vision blurs like passing out again. We then get a high angle on Darmani blurrily looking around. Zooming out a bit, we see his full body now, in a slightly low angle. Pulling out the camera reveals a crowd of Gorons cheering for him, telling us that Darmani is a respected Goron, and that he's surprised at this moment. The pan across the audience alongside the somber piano song also acts to make this moment seem heartfelt. Next we get a close-up of Darmani crying with happiness, his soul is healed. We then get a quick shot of Link's face, as he is still in need of Darmani's help, which Darmani immediately recognizes and allows with a nod of his head. Then we see Darmani thrust his arms up and the sparkling tears rise up and spread, transitioning us back to reality with the newly formed Goron mask. And it drops to Link's feet with the classic shot again. Moving on, we're actually jumping to the Zora mask scene now. Told you we're skipping along. At this point, Zora Mikau has passed out on the shore and needs his soul healed. Once the Song of Healing is played, the camera pans over Mikau's corpse before twirling and moving closer to his face. Moving to the dream scene rather quickly, we next see Mikau floating lifelessly along the blackness, symbolic of being dead in the water. Next we see him placed static on the frame as another Zora Lulu floats from underneath him, but standing perfectly upright from her perspective. It's wacky but cool. Anyway, a spotlight appears on Lulu positioning the floor onto the right wall, which makes Mikau awaken and stand upright in this new reality, and the camera turns to orientate itself. We then get a standard two-shot of the two from behind Mikau's shoulder, which leads to turning to their right to reveal the whole Zora band they are a part of, who each fade in from the blackness, only spotlight illuminating the scene. The next few shots are pretty standard as Mikau takes out his guitar before the final shot showing a wide shot of the whole scene as Mikau and Lulu walk towards the band happily. Mikau's body then fades into sparkles to reveal the Zora mask, and that's the end of the scene. And now we're jumping to the end of the game, as the fourth dungeon doesn't have a significant mask scene, so we're going to go to when all four giants are called together through the Oath to Order, at the end of the game. Once the vibrations from the giants' movement start, the camera begins to spin around Skull Kid, highlighting his sense of disorientation on the events occurring right now. We then see him looking around from a slightly low angle, showing he still has some power, though his actions take away from them. Next we see from behind Link. In this shot, Link is given more space in the frame and is given more power due to the character's actions. Skull Kid is looking around anxious, whilst Link is much more static, showing he is much more in control of the scene. Going back to Skull Kid, he's still up in the air, but the camera is head on and composes him lower on the frame as he freaks in echo. And with the final cry, the camera flips to the opposite view, transitioning us to the next shot. Here we get a very wide shot of the tower with the moon burning up and ready to crush the land. The events are placed very central to the frame, whilst in the next shot we view from a low angle to give the moon superiority, until the giant's legs apparate in front of us, shielding us partially from the moon and taking down its total dominance. Now we're head on from the other side of town, though it's hard to tell. Another giant's legs appear in the frame, towering and guarding over us. Here's another angle of the town, now from within one of the entrances. This positions one of the giants within the dimensions of the frame within a frame, taking our view completely away from the moon and entirely on the superiorly framed giant. And giant number 4 appears again from a low angle, though harsher than before and again without the moon, making it a less and less apparent threat. The camera then turns to show the moon. As per usual, we have a classic good versus evil composition, followed by a series of shots of the other giants in position. Next we get a direct low angle up one of the giants, some legs for some reason, and then a final wide shot of all 4 giants up against the big bad moon. We then see a shot to show the struggle of the push for the giants. Also, I think this next shot is just the moon's intimidating face, though it's very hard to tell. It's there to intimidate and highlight the struggle even more. And with a flash, the moon is stopped, and each giant is shown for dramatic effect, I assume. And here's a final wide shot showing the moon was stopped by the giants. Skipping ahead a tad in this scene, oh no, the threat's not over! Skull Kid's unconscious body is lifted up entirely by Majora's mask. The camera starts from behind Tattle and Tail to show how this happens behind their back and was an unexpected move. Once in the air, Skull Kid dangles on the right side of the frame naturally, and the mask stays on the higher half of the frame. Once dropped, we see a brief shot of Skull Kid's body before it turns up to the mask, showing Skull Kid has lost all power in comparison to the mask. Once the mask flies up to the moon, we once again get another high-angle shot of Link, again giving us that expectation that he has to solve this, whilst also transitioning us to look up towards his view of the evil moon reactivating. This is known as an eyeline match. And though it's subtle, the moon is still positioned more on the right-hand side of the frame. And when Link goes into the uplifting portal to the moon, we get one quick high-angle shot of the movement, with the blurriness bringing us somewhat away from reality once again. And now we're skipping to the end. This is the outro of the game. Fading from white, we get a few shots of the moon establishing where we are. Next we see the moon positioned only in the bottom half of the frame for the first time as it dissipates away. We then swap back to the low angle, but the dominance of the moon is lost due to it disappearing. And with the fanfare music, we get to see the silhouette of the giants alongside rainbows in the sky and the relieved tiny citizens down on the ground. Their minute size and the high angle makes them seem insignificant, which is what they were only a few moments ago. Back to the civilians, now we get a low angle on them as they become more significant again since they're safe. And finally, the giants are given the end of the fanfare with a nice low angle to highlight them as the saviour of the world. And with the dawn of a new day, we see Tattle and Tail flying in the top of the frame over Link. Link and Skull Kid are then shot similarly to the start of the game with how the camera uses a shot reverse shot from the background and foreground. A super wide shot is used to show the difference in size between the characters and the giants, which makes sense. And once that's done, we get to see a proper shot of maskless Skull Kid, who's looking up happily in the frame, in classic good guy composition. And once crying, the camera looks down and in front of him, but not in an intimidating way, but more of an overviewing way, as the giants have that perspective on him, even though they have no bad intentions for him. As the giants leave, the camera goes wide to take us away from the scene, kinda like an anti-establishing shot, I guess. And once the dialogue with Skull Kid begins, the camera is much more equal and friendly composed. When the masked salesman appears, the camera then stays static. Are these motions a subtle cut, or does the salesman actually move like that? And finally, when he disappears, the camera remains far away as he literally disappears. Is it symbolic? It's up to you. Either way, the salesman remains shrouded in mystery. And after a short dialogue, Link rides away on Epona. A final wide shot shows the town celebrating as the credits roll. But we're not quite done yet, let's speed past it. After the credits have rolled, we return back to those lost woods with that first song, and we see Link and Epona walking slowly through it all. Actually, look at that first shot again. Do you notice something familiar? Look at this. The shots replicate symbolically the act of continuing his original journey, as we see Link pass the exact same tree at the start of the game before he met Skull Kid. Also interestingly, at the start Link literally fell through a tree trunk into the new land, and we've only passed a single tree, so maybe there's some crazy theory there. Oh well. Next we come to another shot of the Lost Woods, this time with a beam of light leading Link forward. After a little pause, we see them gallop off to the distance, with a newfound hope that they seem to have lost at the start of the game. And the final shot has the camera move close towards a new carving with Link and Skull Kid on a small stump, alongside the classic Lost Woods motif. And that was the filmmaking behind Majora's Mask. I hope you learned something new today, or at least found the points interesting. Anyway, if you did, consider checking out my other entries in the series. We've got the Mario Bros waiting for you. Anyway, now it's time to decide next week's video game subject. Last time, out of a choice between Nintendo and non-Nintendo, you chose Nintendo. So now you're not getting a choice of Nintendo at all. It's time to go off the wall. Not artistically like this game, but literally. Which wall running game would you rather see dissected next? Assassin's Creed or Uncharted? And instead of using a straw poll like last week, we're now going to use YouTube's card system to do it, because I didn't know that was an option before. On top of voting for your preferred game, it would also be helpful if you commented which game in the series you would like to see too. There's quite a few games in each of the series, and I feel like it would be best to ask directly which one from each you would most like to see. So, let me know. Shout out to Thumbflex for pointing out the poll feature in the YouTube cards, as well as Lime Gamer for giving some good feedback last week about how to improve the series. These comments really help me to evolve as a creator, so I look forward to any more that brew. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to end it off here. So for now, my name's been Daz, you didn't really care, and I will see you in a bit.